the mouse in the matzah factory will give you an inside look of a matzah factory and how it works. Afterwards, if you're interested, you can watch another video of me demonstrating how to make your own cardboard matzah oven and other accessories that you might want to gather from around your house so you can play matzah factory. I'm going to start the story right now. Here's our mouse. Once there was a little mouse who lived in a wheat field in the country. One day, men came and built a fence around the wheat field. Every day they watched over the growing wheat. They watered the field, pulled the weeds, and waited for the wheat to ripen. The little mouse watched too. The little mouse wondered what was so special about this wheat. When the wheat was ripe, the men cut it down. They worked carefully to making sure to keep the wheat dry. They tied it in bundles and loaded it into a wagon. The little mouse decided to follow the wheat. Soon the wagon arrived at the mill. There's the mill. The little mouse poked around until he found a hole in the bottom of the door, and he crept inside. See the big grinders? Huge grinding wheels were crushing the wheat into flour. The millers carefully poured the flour into sacks and loaded them onto a truck. The little mouse jumped aboard the truck and hid among the sacks, wondering where the truck would take them. They drove for a long time. They left the country with its open fields and came to the city. The little mouse peeked out. He saw tall buildings. He saw crowds of people. He heard the noise of cars and trucks on the street. At last the truck stopped in front of an old building. Workers came to unload the sacks of flour. Quickly and quietly, the little mouse jumped down and followed. An inspector stood at the door, checking to see that each flour sack was dry and tightly closed. The little mouse was afraid he would be discovered, so he climbed up to a window ledge, squeezed through a crack, and hid behind a clock. He saw a large room with many people. They were all very busy. In one area, workers were unloading the sacks of flour. In another place, they were bringing in buckets of water. In the middle was a man with a mixing bowl. When the mixing man called out, the flour man scooped up a cup of flour from the sack, reached through the little window, and dumped the flour into the bowl. And when the mixing man called out again, the water man filled his pitcher with water, passed it through his window, and poured the water into the bowl. The mixing man worked very quickly, mixing the flour and water into a lump of dough. The little mouse watched. He wondered what was so special about this dough. The mixing man brought the dough to another area where many people stood at a long table. He gave a piece of dough to each person. They quickly rolled their dough into circles. The circles were passed to another table where a woman poked holes into them with a special tool. She lined up the circles on the rack near a brick oven. The baker slid the circles into the oven. Minutes later, they were crisp and brown. A delicious smell filled the room as he took them out of the oven and placed them on a rolling cart. All of a sudden, a bell rang. The people began to clean their work areas. They scrubbed the tables, sanded down the rolling pins, and washed and dried the bowls. When they were finished, the mixing man reset the clock and called out for more flour and water. The little mouse couldn't resist the delicious smell. He followed the cart into a room where people were packing the baked circles into boxes and tying them with string. Here's all the customers coming to buy the matzah. Families were standing in line to buy the boxes. He hopped onto the counter to take a peek. This is what he read. Golden matzah. This matzah is made of wheat which has been watched from the time of harvest through the time of baking. That's right, the little mouse thought. I watched this matzah. I watched it from the time the wheat began to grow in my wheat field. And I watched it being harvested. I watched it being ground into flour at the mill, and I watched it being mixed into dough. I watched it being baked into matzah. The little mouse felt very important. He decided it was time to return to the country. Soon more wheat would be planted, and he wanted to be home in time to watch it again. And that was the end.